Well, welcome to the GA podcast, another edition. I hope you enjoyed what you've heard so far. I'm joined today with Neil McFarlane. Neil's part of our team, and I thought it was only fitting that he joins and explains how he's been involved in the industry and what he finds interesting. The whole thing about these GA podcasts is really about how do we upgrade the industry, how do we get things right first time, and of course, how do we find the right client. It's all about helping you become the perfect client and to save you lots of money. So, with that in mind, I thought I'd just introduce Neil. Neil's been working with us. Me and Neil worked together over 10 years now, and it's been a fun journey. So, Neil, tell us a little bit about you, just so the audience can get a little flavour.
Background in engineering, and I moved into the glass industry about 20 odd years ago now. And really, once you're in the glass industry, it's one of those industries that captures you, I suppose.
Very transparent, I imagine.
Yeah, very funny. I just think that the end results actually show something that is really nice and gives clients something that they can actually be proud of.
Yeah. What is it that you transitioned from engineering and into the glass, which obviously has a lot of engineering and a lot of speciality and a lot of depth, and I don't think people realise all the supply chain and all the different technical parts to it. What part do you love the most, do you think, about what your journey in the glass?
I think the end result is always very, very pleasing. It's a much more complex product, both in terms of the material, but also in terms of the putting something together for a client. I mean, an entrance, for example, we all just walk through a front door of a building. We don't necessarily pay too much attention, but it's often a lot more complex than one might imagine, just in terms of making sure that it operates in the right way, making sure that the glass, in terms of both solar gain, in terms of heat retention in the building, etc., it is a very complex piece of equipment.
So yeah, and I get that. I mean, you're a specialist in entrances, and you've worked on some really inspiring projects. So, what would, when you think of a perfect client, what sort of constitutes a perfect client? How in the context of what we set this podcast out, which is about finding the perfect client, but also helping them see themselves as the perfect client so they can save money. So what sort of tips or insider tracks do you think we could give them so that they could have more of a flow right through their process?
The first thing would be latch on to the process sooner rather than later. When you're thinking about putting a building up, you think about the foundations, very important. The structure, very important. And those are the things that get focused on at the early stages of a construction process. But I think that the first point of contact in any building is the entrance. That's the bit where, if you are coming into a building, it's the first impression of a building. Yeah. And if you don't give that the necessary priority, then you're not necessarily going to present the best building that you possibly can. And I think that it's necessary to be as early in that process as possible. There are some spectacular entrances in buildings throughout the UK, and those spectacular entrances are the ones that have been given priority. Those are the ones that are given attention much earlier in the process. But even the more straightforward entrances ought to be given that priority, ought to be given that credence.
What are some of the other ways that, decarbonisation is a big buzzword at the moment. And, through glass replacement and choosing the right spec of glass will save your M&E, of course. Is there anything you can throw at that?
One simply looks at glass and says, oh, it's glass. It isn't. It's far from that. There are constant R&D things happening with the product in terms of solar gain, in terms of heat retention within a building. And the the coatings on glass are constantly evolving, and they are far, far better than they were 5 years ago, certainly way better than they were 10 years ago. And that continues to save clients money. We've recently done the job where we replaced an atrium roof. To be honest, it was an old roof. It was frankly shot, and we've been asking the client what sort of savings are they now seeing as a result of the roof being replaced, and they will be able to show savings.
I think I've seen. Surprisingly, we're seeing an uptick in the aftercare of people using solar control films, and different type of protective films. And on the job that we did, I mean, they were reporting 15%, which is huge. It was, I was really, really surprised, but they had it calculated. And I think that's that whole thing of calculating M&E and then payoff. I mean, people used to do it with the whole solar, and probably still do, with PV and solar and the whole fit scheme that came out, and what the payoff would be, and it was sort of if it was really aggressive, it was a 5-year payback, but on average it was 10 years. And I think with and that was in households. Now when you bring that into commercial buildings, and where you've got big expanses of glass, and then you upgrade the glass with the new coatings, as you mentioned, I see 15% as an easy win, because your air conditioning is not working as hard. You're not using blinds. You're not having people work in different spots because they're blinded by the sunlight. The whole building generally just feels a lot brighter but comfortable. So I think, I mean, if you translated 15% into a saving, that across the UK, it'd be in millions, if not hundreds of millions, I would have thought.
Yeah, I mean, just on a very, very simple note, with good solar coating on a piece of glass, you mentioned it, there's no need to put blinds up. I don't know what a set of blinds costs in a building, but imagine a very large building which had blinds all over the place, which would not be necessary these days with the solar coatings that are available. It's a massive saving. It's an absolutely huge saving.
No, you're probably listening and thinking, okay, well, we're not Martin Lewis of the Money programme, but we're certainly making you think. If you're looking after a building or you're designing something new, hopefully you're thinking, okay, well, from what Neil said, is early consultation, early discussions. On an existing building, obviously you've got the structure, you've got the fabric. I think it's looking after the O&Ms and actually going through them and understanding what you have there, how old is your stock, and conditional surveys. I think a good conditional survey will give you at least give you a budget so you can start to plan 2 or 3 years in advance. So you're not constantly reactive, you can be really proactive. When you're building a new part, which obviously you're dealing with architects on a daily basis, Neil, what would you say to them? Where are their biggest wins? I mean, is there some new technology in terms of material? Obviously, we know aluminium. Our windows are mainly aluminium. That's fully recyclable. The glass is recyclable. Is there any new materials that you're seeing, or any new trends, or any ways that you can think particularly that if they did this, they would be able to, save some money?
I'm going to come back to the sort of the early wins. So talking to us, companies like us, earlier than they currently do, because generally when it comes to us, they've spec'd something up, but it's a fairly loose spec. It isn't always the right spec. We have architects who we work with on a regular basis. We have architects we work with on a less regular basis. Those that know us talk to us, and the process is easier, because what happens is that they don't have to go back and change things, because they've had a discussion with us And we've said, well, actually, that's not the right spec for that type of building. And that can be from the most basic of doors or window to a whole facade. And if it's right first time, then obviously that feeds down through the whole design process, because where you're talking about, let's say, where you're talking about a facade, there's a huge weight in a facade. If you can spec the glass right first time, then the structure that carries that weight doesn't have to be quite as robust design-wise. The whole process it's simpler if we're involved earlier.
There was a thing a couple of years ago where in Germany they were talking about banning triple glazing because of the weight. So it was very functional, but the average two installers were struggling with the weight of the glass. And, they saw that the injury levels were going up. And I think that's the thing. Being in grand entrances are usually some big phallic design, and they're big, they're tall, they're oversized, they're weighty, and that's our point. I think that we do well. It's almost like our USP. However, it usually involves cranes. It usually involves a lot of planning and logistics and road closures, and of course, there are. If you're talking about curved type glass, it's coming from abroad, and you're limited amount of good quality suppliers that you can trust to be millimeter perfect. But there is a big trend in big weight. I would say, if I was to guess, the average weight of glass that we change, and we change a lot, it would be about 300, 350 kilos, and that's obviously mechanical equipment needed for that. You're not back in the old days of a shop front with 10 men around it.
It's a good point you make, actually, because whenever we're talking to anybody in the chain, we are looking at the whole picture. And yeah, you're right. There's craneage, there's machinery, there's lifting gear, there's suckers, there's all sorts of equipment. Yeah, abseiling, etc., etc. And if we look at that, and there is a real view to saving money, we can look at it in the round, not just at the actual product. Let's say, right, I want to install this piece of glass. Right, well, it takes 8 men to install that piece of glass. But if we spec it up differently, it doesn't take 8 men, it takes 6 men. It's an obvious saving. And our thinking is always about the whole process, not just about the product or even what it may look like. Our focus is on the whole thing. We're always happy when it looks fantastic.
There's a lot goes into sampling, especially when you're changing glass. I mean, the amount of money we spend on samples, because a lot of the glass specs are now out of date. The replacement glasses are not always considering the hue of the glass. They're more about matching performance or upgraded performance, U values, K values, and things like that. So yeah, I mean that's even though I quite enjoy that, trying to just find the glass and the blend. It still takes time and money. So there's a segment to our podcasts that are as we sort of begin to wrap up, which is a sort of quick fire, and it's called The Point of It, right? And it's an acronym. Again, I love acronyms, as you will find out as you keep listening. So point is, where's the potential for our industry? Where's the potential for change?
In terms of the product, it is constantly evolving, it is constantly changing, and there's probably not enough recognition that is happening. The smart door, there's huge potential for change there, and as a result, there will be people who are able to monitor doors. Do I see it as a sort of bank of computers with people sitting in front of the computers, or the actual computers going, hello, there's a fault in this door? Probably the latter. And, there'll have to be a reactive team that comes out and sorts out the problem.
Machine learning actually putting out the job cards for the guys, because they're being ahead. So that, if that's a potential, where do you see that there's an opportunity? Is there an appetite within the industry for that?
The appetite will be driven by the clients. ultimately, if maintenance of buildings in most buildings in the current day it's not an easy task. They are like motor vehicles. They're constantly going wrong. There's not many moving parts in a building. Those moving parts, windows, doors, lifts, for example, they are the bits that go wrong most often. And let's say there's a building with 1,000 doors. You've got to monitor 1,000 doors. You've got to make sure that all of those doors are operating properly. Otherwise, your fire strategy, for instance, goes out the window. Sorry for the pun. And it's a difficult task. It's a difficult thing to be able to do. The more that becomes automated, the better it is going to be for the client. And I think the client will be the one that ultimately drives it. But the client has to understand what that technology is, how it benefits them, what the savings are, and then implement it. And I don't think we're quite at that stage yet, but I don't think we're that far away from it either.
What impact would you like to see? What impact are you working on where you're actually, you and your teams are working towards or bringing some of these potentials and opportunities into the field?
It's a difficult question because as you know, we're constantly working on the next job. So it would be nice to be able to get more opportunity, more knowledge about what is out there. So talking to our suppliers, talking to clients ultimately, because they are the people who I think will drive it. Maybe through architects. And when you're on the ground trying to get a building up and operational, it's not always easy to get the time to sit in front of clients and architects and suppliers to get all of this information to pass it on.
Okay, you sort of skirted that. So
I did.
So I'm going to move on to the next part of that point, which is okay, and probably the reason it's a difficult one is because the need. Do you see that there is a definite need within this industry? Does it want to be impacted? Do you think there is a need in the industry for some kind of change, for some kind of upskilling, for upgrading, for even just cognizance of what their own challenges are about, some time to sit down, to reflect, to consult with people that are, I don't know, I wouldn't say we're thought leaders, but certainly we're experienced people. What do you think? Where's the need?
I think that we're a conservative industry. We don't change things rapidly. There are construction methods which have been employed for tens and hundreds of years, so we don't change things easily. But yeah, I think there is a need. It's how do we get that across? That's the difficult bit.
Well, that's the last part point, the T, and it's how do we transform? How do we be part of the whole process? How do we teach as we bring 3 new people? I know we're working on some new schemes where we're going to be bringing on apprentices, but what's the easiest way to make a transformation? What do you think that we could do, or even we could, bringing it back to the start of the show about saving money? What transformation could we bring that's actually going to both be efficient, save money, same time, same resources? Time, resources, it all equates to money. It all will affect the budget. Yeah. So any changes you make in these things, but it's like, I mean, my thing about transformation has got to be digital transformation. I think, when we look back in 5 years' time, we'll think, how the hell did we do that? Why did we spend so much time in paper and journals and files when everything's working in a much more seamless, fluid, it's much more connected. I'm looking at stuff that's on blockchain and blockchain as a service, whereas, the last 10, 15 years has been dominated by software as a service. I think blockchain is going to be the new big thing, and privacy, will be part of that. But what do you think? I mean, what's your transformative?
I think that BIM, we're getting into BIM, and that's as far as we're concerned, that's a good thing. We'll be able to simplify the process that we've done on wads of paper before, so that's only a good thing. BIM is good as far as getting the basic information out there, but we talked earlier about the technology behind what we do, and the complexity behind what we do, and it will still need that level of expertise, which I don't think anybody going onto a BIM website will be able to spec up a door and say that's exactly how I want the door, because there's other factors. So I think we can improve it. I think we can speed up the process, but I don't think, not as far as I can see at the moment, that we can get to a point where we can step back and somebody can just hand us a digital file and say, make that for me. I think there's still going to be other considerations. We touched on it earlier, machinery to get it in, the technology in the glass, the all of those things still need a level of expertise.
And many of you have been listening to this and they'll be thinking, hold on, we're already working on this. We're working with SolidWorks, we're working with Revit files, we've got off-site production. I know there's factories that are doing 3D printing, and they'll all be using technology to its max. I mean, there's guys I know who are working on railways using HoloLens type interfaces, and the VR and the VA space are progressing really, really fast. And at some point I'd like to hear from them. I'd like to have a conversation and just see what they think about what the transformation could be and how it could be brought down to grassroots level. So we're a relatively small company, but there are certainly big engineering firms that are working on some big schemes, and I know that they're actively looking at it. I think it's a really interesting space. I think today's session has been really interesting. I think, Neil, what you've brought some insight, and anyone listening, anyone involved, what you're saying is think ahead, take plenty of time to actually consider how the building's being used and how it will be used after it's been built. Bring on consultants, whoever they are, early on to discuss, ways in which, the resources could be saved, where time could be saved, because ultimately that'll save money, and also maybe share the technology, because if, especially on these big projects, if they're already rolling out technology, maybe that should be shared across some of the smaller supply chain partners and contractors that are working on it. So, upskill us all, really. That's what we're looking for, is we should all be learning. Someone said, what do you do in the company? I said, I'm still a junior, because all the time I'm learning, I'm junior. Anyway, guys, thanks for tuning in, and Neil, thanks a lot, and we'll catch up soon.
Yep.
Take care.